Well, it is Monday morning, and so we wish you a happy morning and a happy and a warm welcome to another episode of The Nerd Out. My name is Lyle.
I am Jack.
We are two of the pastors here at Element City Church.
Yep.
And how's it going today? It's hoodie weather. Look at us.
It's hoodie weather. Look at us. We're not complaining about the heat anymore.
Yeah.
So thank the Lord. Fall has arrived.
That's right. We still have the air conditioning going in this room for those wondering at home, which is nobody. But we still have the AC going so that we don't sweat in here because,
Ain't no one got time for that.
That's right. We want to enjoy the hoodie weather even indoors.
Yes, I agree.
All right, so we had another wonderful Sunday. We were into week 2 of Good, Beautiful, and Kind.
Yep.
And sermon title yesterday was, remind me, Walking
a Better Way.
Walking a Better Way. There it is, Walking a Better Way. Yeah. So we had a couple of key takeaways, which we've been making sure to throw up on the screen for everyone to see. And so our key takeaways from this Sunday service, number 1, Jesus calls us to remain in him or to abide in him, depends on your translation. But he wants us to remain in him, not just to dip in and out of our relationship with God. Number 2, being with God transforms us from the inside out, impacting how we relate to others. 3, the church is called to model unity by loving one another despite our differences. And lastly, healthy relationships require staying present, humble, and curious, even in the midst of tension.
Yep.
Did we miss anything there?
No, I'll probably think of a couple things that I emphasized last night. But
Sure.
yeah, that's the basis. I think in the midst of the tension that we all have to navigate in relationships, that the church is meant to model the way forward, to walk a better way than maybe what we see in the context of our culture. When there's conflict, we tend to sometimes demonize. I use the silly illustration of Leanne Rimes and Selena Gomez and the songs, Cut It Off or I Can't Live Without You, and the idea of enmeshment or detachment or ejection out of a relationship. And so that we need to be people who are fully present to God, to ourselves, and to one another.
Yeah. I thought good question to start with as we talk about John 15, just mano, remain in me, abide with me. Just that idea of you stay right here.
Right.
That Jesus wants us to stay right here. And so if that's a new concept for somebody, how might that challenge maybe our notion of what it means to be a Christian in the 21st century?
I think so much of our understanding of growing is linked to knowledge and linked to the study of, and therefore the acquisition of. And that's where I think the word apprentice, if we can revive that word a little bit, that's so much not a part of our vernacular or our know-how or our understanding. But when Jesus uses the word, come be my disciple, come follow me, that really is the premise of what he's getting at, that he spent 3 years investing in these earliest disciples who were drastically different. They weren't we joked about not all the same Enneagram number or the same personality style or background. They were each unique and they were diverse, and yet somehow in the midst of being around Jesus and having him invest in them and for them to remain, to mano, with him, they were changed from the inside out. And I think for us in our cultural moment, it's the same call. It maybe feels different, looks different because we don't walk around following someone for 3 years. But what would it look like for us to grow a heart and a desire in our emotional state and our mental state to say, okay, I want to be with God more. And we tend to frame that in, well, that's what monks do. That's what nuns do. Like, I'm an insurance salesman. How do I do this? And I think it is just a framework of continually coming back to the reality that there's never a moment that you're living where God is not present. And so how do you grow your awareness of God's presence and attunement to God's presence. That's part of the, we talked about the principle or just the practice of um, the contemplative life. How do we grow more as a contemplative, with contemplative prayer, of just growing our awareness that it's not just attaining something, attaining knowledge and acquiring it and filing it away, and then I move on with my life. No, I'm constantly trying to grow my awareness of God's presence, and align my life, my habits, my practices to that awareness. Um, but I'm curious, maybe what you have some thoughts of how best to do that in the 21st century. How do we know? How do we remain?
Well, yeah, I think the follow up that I would have brought back to you is the importance of contemplative prayer and just kind of being able to think about God. When it comes to like building relationships, we're so used to being around people.
Mm-hmm.
And so like there's a lot of things I know about you because we've spent a lot of time together,
Right.
and multiple days throughout the week we're spending time around each other, to where I know how you react to things and I know how you think about things. So we, to start with knowledge, like in the 21st century, in the YouTube age, oh, I don't know how to do that. Cool. Let me just Google it. Let's just
Right. I
YouTube it, and I'll
YouTube it.
watch a couple videos. And I've said that, like, once I bought a house and had to remodel a house, watching YouTube video is no substitute for actual experience.
Yeah.
And that's the idea of apprenticeship, is of being close to. And so I was going to say, can you walk us through, like, maybe the contemplative prayer side of things is so important because we don't get to see God. And so we have to train our minds to think well, to think about God in order to have that awareness of God's presence.
Yeah. It takes practice. This is something I've been working on over the last 5 years or so. I have a chair in my front living room that overlooks the window out looking on our street. And it's a quiet place, and I can see birds and I can see, yeah, and I'm just trying to, that's why I love hiking in nature, because I think that just, it's a cathedral of God's creation that just, if we slow down, and I'll find myself taking a hike and then I'll find a spot and sit down and just be like, okay, God, I want to be aware of your presence here. Just as the same in my living room, just the same at church, just the same in my car. So it's just trying to attune myself to his presence. And even in a contemplative way, reading scripture, that it's the old Lectio Divina kind of practice that's been around for hundreds of years. And that's where I think church history can help us grow in this, that you read through a passage, a small passage. Often I like to do that with the Psalms, and then I read through it like 3 or 4 times in a row, and I'm trying to listen or attune myself to a word or a phrase that pops out, and then I just start sitting with that. Okay, why is that popping out? Why is that jumping out versus all the other words or all the other phrases? Why is that one? And I'll just pray into it. Okay, God, why is my mind caught up with that one? Or if it's say it's an aspect of God, that he's a strong tower. Okay, so some of the psalmists talk about God's a strong tower we can run to. So then you start thinking about, okay, what is a strong tower? And in ancient time, why would that be important? What would that mean to someone that was trying to flee, or trying to run, trying to hide? And you start thinking about how God exemplifies that, and how I can lean into his presence with that. And then what does that do to my heart? What does that do to my mind? What does that do to my emotions? How can I rest in that? And I think that's the beauty of more the contemplation, and in building that as a habit in a fast-paced, busy, always occupied, always on kind of world and moment that we all have to navigate. We have a lot of things we need to do, but maybe one of the best things we can do is just trying to hit pause. Just like you'll pause a movie to go to the bathroom, can you pause your day at certain moments just to attune yourself to God? Some of the ancients talked about the daily office, And it would be a rhythm of, we see Daniel practice this, and in Babylon, it was morning, noon, afternoon, and evening. We see, if you've been to a monastery, you see monks practice fixed hour of prayer. And the daily office is maybe just, we have a moment in the morning, we have a moment maybe at lunch, where you just take 10 minutes. And it's not trying to be exhaustive or expansive, it's just finding moments to try to attune our soul again to the fact that the God's presence is always around us and with us. And how do I remain? How do I know? How do I abide? How do I listen? How do I bring my fears, my tensions, my anxieties to God and leave that at His feet and let Him process that with me?
Yeah. So even being in the 21st century, it's kind of like the time frame doesn't matter. What
Correct.
matters is we best learn about people when we spend time in their presence.
Mhm.
And we know that God is present through prayer, that He delights to show up in those moments. We know that God loves to show up to prepared places, like when we kind of prepare our heart, when we get ready. Like that was the whole point of the temple and the sacrifice. But so like when we come to worship, God loves to show up to that. When we come to His word, His presence abides in His word. So I think it's, how do we help people shift from the mindset of I have to know about God intellectually through reading, and I approach my relationship with God in a very intellectual manner versus, no, this is a relationship. Like how when you meet someone, a new friend or someone that you're interested in, if you're single and you're like, ooh, I want to date this person. Like,
Right.
what does that look like? There's a little bit of information gathering where you might do the Facebook stalking and kind of be like, what are their interests?
Right.
But you just want
There's
to
no
arm
shame in
yourself
that
with
game.
that information so that you can make a good impression, or so that you can enjoy some of those things with that person. And even still, like the most important things you learn about that person, you're not learning through their Instagram profile.
You're learning from them.
Facebook posts. You learn it from actually spending time with the person.
And I think that's when we talk about navigating tension and staying humble and staying present and staying curious, that we threw out the phrase that I think is true, that curiosity is a superpower in a polarized reality. And that it's asking questions. It's what we do when we are getting to know someone. We're asking questions, we're listening to the responses, and we're listening beyond the words. We're trying to hear the heart behind it and their emotion behind it. And like you and I were in church before the service started last night, I was blown away by a congregant member coming up and sharing something in an offhanded comment. I've been around this lady for 10 years. And for her to say a couple different things stunned me to the point I had no idea what, like, some of her background and some of the reality that she faced. And it just awakened me to go, gosh, I got to ask more questions. And I think so staying curious and asking those questions is really vital to any healthy relationship. So why can't we bring that to God as well?
What kind of, just to help the viewers at home, what kind of questions do you like to ask when you're trying to remain curious about a person or curious about an idea that someone's presented? Especially if it's a moment where you feel like you're wanting to respond.
There's tension or there's disagreement or I don't see it from their point of view. I really want to ask questions like, hey, tell me how did you didn't just arrive here or at that stance or that posture or that position overnight. Like you didn't wake up this morning with that. So walk me through some of your experiences and some of your background of how you got here.
Yeah.
I'd love to hear your story a little bit. And can I share a little bit of mine with that?
I think that's, Tell me more about how you got to that place, or tell me more about what led you to believe that, or, where have you heard that said before, like especially ideas about God. Like I had a conversation with someone after church last night that was talking about having another conversation with someone who was trying to get over the differences between how God is portrayed in the Old Testament versus how Jesus is portrayed in the New Testament.
Yeah.
And so he's just like, I don't know how the best way to respond to something like that. So how would you respond? And so even just asking questions there of, okay, well, how do we, a lot of times you're asking questions because you really do want to understand a person's point
Right.
of view. And I think more often than not, we're pre-wired to just immediately defend our position when more often than not,
Yes.
we also don't really know the position the other person's coming from at all.
Correct.
So one person may be speaking about apples, you're wanting to argue about oranges. And it's just like neither, there's just no benefit to that.
There's an impasse. Yeah, like you miss each other,
Yeah.
and you miss connecting. And again, we speak truth in love. So it's not that you can't have differences. I think that's the danger is when you don't stay present and remain with God and remain with one another, you can't navigate tension. And we typically will go to one end of the continuum. We'll either eject and we're out of it and we're done, or we kind of go to the place of
Are you getting a pollster call as well?
I am probably actually it's my daughter.
Oh, okay.
So
Well, I got a pollster call like 2 minutes
yeah,
ago.
I will call her
I
back.
believe
in a
this is
second.
our first nerd out that has had not just one, now two phone
Listen,
calls.
I have do not disturb on, but my kids always get through. So yeah, I'll call her in a second.
All right.
I don't know, I forget where it was. So the idea of either
Curiosity. Yeah.
ejecting out of a relationship and cutting it off, or enmeshing into the other person and just foregoing my own opinion. And now I don't have an opinion because I'm just going to adopt yours in order to not rock the boat. And
Just like the person last night when it's like, how do we handle that? Avoid.
right, run.
Like more often than not, yeah. Like there's a lot of times I think that I've noticed that people, rather than stay curious and engage in a conversation, they shut down that thing or just move on to something else, as
Right.
opposed to being willing to linger and stay curious of,
Yeah.
okay, where'd that come from?
And curiosity is not like some of the ancient writers, even like Augustine wrote about Augustine, okay, 4th century, writing about the danger of curiosity. And I think that's actually some of what the church has carried forward is, well, if I stay curious, then I'm going to change my convictions, or I'm going to leave the straight and narrow and I'm going off into the wide road. And the reality is, okay, we can stay curious with wisdom, garnished and guard and maybe anchored into divine wisdom. So it's not that I abandon things, but I stay open, and I stay open to people, and especially open to their story. And I can begin to pray and ask for God to show how maybe His story could intersect their story and begin to create or open them up to maybe something new that they've been closed off to or blinded to or unaware of in that. And so,
Yeah, and I think it's not just about ideas. I think it's important to stay curious just about people in general. If you want to help build kind of community, like that's really important. And that was something that a couple of years ago, going through a discipleship group, someone had shared like they wanted to make more connections with people at church, but they kind of struggled because their mind would get all over the place. And that was my challenge to this person was stay curious. Challenge yourself to ask 3 more questions when you feel like you want to shut down, like when you're just like ready to eject from the conversation. Figure it out. What are 3 more questions that you can ask to try to uncover something about what that person's passionate about, or to get that person to talk about something that they enjoy? Because like when you see that, that's when you really get to learn about a person, when you really get to know more, is just kind of finding what it is that they enjoy and then learning how to just kind of relate to that. And that was a game changer for this person. Like there's just been several relationships that I know that he never expected he would have found his way into, and yet he has, because he stayed curious. So
I think one of the easiest questions to ask people is give me, and we've done this in our small group occasionally, give me a high and a low. What's been a high in the last week or last month? What's been a low? And I think we just, and then you shut up and give people space to think about that, to ponder that. And then you can ask a follow-up question from there, and you're getting to create a connection with someone that, and I think maybe that's where the church needs to model going forward, is that we don't just, we've got to get better at handling the tension and differences that we have with people and remaining present to God, to them. And that was my hope last night, is that we would all wrestle with the reality that there's progress for all of us to make in that.
Yeah, for sure.
Myself included, big time. Like, I will
Yeah.
own that.
For all of us, absolutely.
Yeah.
There's a verse that talks about in Acts 4:13. I don't know if you referenced it last night.
I did. Yep.
I thought you did. Okay. So just this idea of the disciples, these were people who had been with Jesus.
Mm-hmm.
They knew that. So how can we as Christians, how do we better exemplify being with Jesus in a way that is noticeable for others? Like we've talked about kind of these contemplative aspects, but what are other aspects of being with Jesus that people can see in our lives if we're willing to just invest in those areas of our relationship with Christ?
I think quick to serve, not quick to judge, would be a big way to demonstrate that that what we see in the life of Jesus is that he was a calm, non-anxious presence wherever he went, and people who were nothing like him seemed still drawn to him. And when there was heartache and people approaching him, he never turned a blind eye to them or a cold shoulder. He actually ministered. And so you step into moments where you can serve, where you can help, instead of just sometimes we get in a posture of I'm going to well, I don't agree with you, so and I turn my shoulder versus hey, is there a way that I can help and bring some of God's presence and hope and joy, a smile that we live in a cultural moment right now where we spent the fall going through Philippians and talking about the power of joy. I think there can be a lot of power in joy and a lot of power in a smile and taking thought of others and delighting in them, listening. Those are all simple ways that we can get better. I don't know if that answers the question.
Yeah, I mean, kind of what I hear is respond to people with compassion.
Yep.
Like that was Jesus's response, was
Mhm.
he showed compassion for people. And then he stepped into moments to serve when he could. I think that's
Right.
a huge part of humility that
Mhm.
we haven't gotten into too much yet, but part of
Right.
humility is being humble with my time.
Mhm.
And so if there's opportunities for me to
Mhm.
set aside something because I've got an opportunity to serve and I
Right.
can meet a need, it's just that willingness to engage in meeting a need.
And I
trying
think
to be
I mentioned
present
it
in
last
those
night.
needs.
Part of humility is lowering our reactivity, lowering our defensiveness. What if we could just become people who are less defensive and less reactive in a moments? I think that would model some of that calm presence that you see in the life of Jesus, and what he modeled.
Yeah. What are other things when you've just been around a person who you're like, I think this person probably is a Christian. Like this, there's just been times I've had those interactions
Yep.
too, where there's something that emanates from that person. What would those types of things? I know you kind of talked about smiling, just some of that, but I think it goes deeper than that. Like, what is it about people like that it seems to exude?
I think there's a delight about life, that they don't. They don't have a defeated posture or I'm trying to think they don't give off a disgruntledness.
It feels like they radiate joy.
Yes, they
Like there's
radiate
just this
joy.
joy that oozes out
Mhm.
of. Yeah.
There's a hope, like a palatable hope that you can feel from them. And maybe that's the question is, do you give off a palatable hope or joy for the people around you at your workplace or the people who are your neighbors or the people you work out with? Are you a person? And it doesn't mean you have to be an extrovert. So it's not just extrovert like qualities. You can be strongly introverted and yet don't you have a joy that you don't have a frown on your face everywhere you go and every moment. Doesn't mean you can't have down moments, but it means I live from a security and a hope that I have in Jesus that transcends all my circumstances. And yes, my circumstances can be troubling and difficult and a struggle, and I can own that and I can lament and I can have trusted people I pour that out to. Man, this is really hard. But at the same time, this doesn't define me, and it doesn't change everything about me in this moment. And so living with that joy, that hope that seems to radiate, or it's palatable, that seems noticeable,
Yeah.
especially in our moment.
And if I can speak to the introverts as one of you, I know that for me, some of the feedback I've received is I don't always come off as approachable.
Mm.
And so at work, when I worked at Apple for a long time, especially when I'd be doing repairs in the back, like I just kind of have a stoic demeanor that can look like I'm unhappy.
Mm.
You know, there's different acronyms that are not appropriate that we won't share that talk about people who, when their face is at rest, what they project. So even for me, I had to learn that just because of that kind of that stoic nature, that when people approach me, just responding with warmth,
Mm-hmm.
that's where that smile, just a gentle kindness, you know, just
Yeah.
the gentle smile of, hey, what's going on? How can I help? Just that helps kind of ease that tension to where people feel that they can approach you. And that was something that I had to learn that was true of me, that I had to give extra effort. And so even in the midst of a bad day, there are times I'm frustrated in a moment of something, and I just have to deep breath and be like, I'm sorry, it's been a little bit rough, but I really want to help. So I'm sorry if I'm coming across differently. Like, what can I do? You know, and then just at that moment, let that person know that they're important, that they matter, that what they need is important to you.
Right.
So,
right.
Yeah.
I think the ability to notice others, that's what I mean by taking thought of others, is when as you're just going throughout your day, if you notice something, speak into that. And that doesn't mean, again, that you have to be an extrovert and always talking. It's not like on my walks every morning, there are some people who will wave and smile every single morning. There are other people who are not that way. And so I'm probably wired a little bit more where I'm going to wave and smile. There's one guy, I call him Grumpy Guy, because I've never gotten like a wave back or head nod, and one day I'm going to break him. And we're going to break through in that. But the ability to notice others and just take thought of them, like, hey, I saw what you did. And I wanted to tell you, I thought that was really awesome that you helped that kid pick that up, or you notice that maybe they look a little down and just say, hey, look, can I just want to wish you a good day. And taking thought of others is important. They're carrying something heavy, offer to help, remove the load a little bit and go with them. So it's simple, small things that I think we can do that help radiate that presence of God.
Yeah. And that just the sad reality, though, is even though they're simple, small things, for that to become a regular part of our practice that takes weeks and months of investment in just being present.
It takes intentionality. Yeah, it really does. And it's not easy. And it is easy for our circumstances, especially when we're going through a struggling season, to become so inward focused and direct all of our attention. We can become oblivious to the people around us. We're all prone to that. It's easy to go inward. That's Augustine again, curved in on ourselves. And so it's just imperative that you just don't see that in the life of Jesus. And it doesn't mean he was, gregarious and meeting he didn't heal everybody. But it sure seemed like he lived with a lot of intentionality about noticing and staying present to people and staying present to the Lord. I mentioned last night the rhythm that you see in the life of the Gospels when you read it is Jesus often withdrew alone to be with the Father. And so there is something about this contemplative kind of habits that seem, okay, if I can remain and dwell with God, then I'm kind of filled up to then be able to remain present and to stay humble and to stay curious with the people around me, even if we are different and even if we have differences or different backgrounds or we don't even see things eye to eye. But I don't have to exclude them or eject away from them. I can learn to bring that posture of Jesus-like love even into this moment.
Yeah, that's good. Let's see what other questions we've got here.
I think one of the things I was going to mention I didn't get a chance to hit last night was I think it's a reminder of the table. So like this coming Sunday, we're going to take communion. Again, we're talking about the rhythm of forgiveness and how that's to be a part of how we're going. So precursor to Sunday. But the table is such a prominent reality through Christendom, throughout history, from as Jesus put that into practice and said, do this in remembrance of me, that the table is the place where people who are drastically different find a commonality by the one who is greater than their differences. So the new movie Bonhoeffer is coming out, which I can't wait to go see.
It's not just Bonhoeffer. Bonhoeffer, pastor, spy, assassin.
That does make it sound more intriguing.
That's the full title.
So excited about that. But near the end of the movie, I've just seen like a couple clips. He obviously dies and is martyred for his faith.
Spoilers, Jack. Spoilers.
Well, listen, they should know this by now. Church history, come on.
I mean, they have had 80 years. So.
Right. And I mean, it's not like this is a shocker. But he's doing communion in, I don't know if it's in a cell or in his place before they lead him off. And he invites one of the Nazi soldiers who has become a Christian to come and partake. And the Nazi soldier knows what's going to happen. And he is kind of rebuffing and saying, no, like this is your moment. And he's like, no. The table is Jesus's table. And it's for each one of us. And so he comes and he serves him communion as he's getting ready to go off and be killed. And I thought, man, what an incredible image that, yes, I can have differences of stances. I mean, there is nothing more different than that reality. Yet it was the commonality of the crucified Christ and the resurrected Christ who prepares a table for each of us to have a seat at, not because we're good enough, but because he did something for us in our behalf and invites us to the table. And how can we as a church continue to invite people to the table to experience and love that they can remain in and live through and be bolstered up into, that they can then invite others to that same love, and that we can be people that model that kind of love.
Yeah. So we've talked kind of about staying present, not ejecting, curiosity. We've touched just a little bit on humility, but just to drill deeper on that humility aspect, like what is it about humility that enables us to love others well? Like what's the connection between humility and love?
I think the connection, multifaceted, but at the end of the day, it's what Jesus said, that the Son of Man did not come to be served, but to serve, and to give his life as a ransom for many. That is a posture of the soul that is the baseline foundation for humility, that it's not about me. And it's about how God can leverage me for the good of someone else. And I want to value them. One of the New Testament writer talks about, don't think of yourself more highly than you ought. And in our culture that is kind of pushed, that we keep promoting ourselves, but to take thought of others. And so I think that humility is Dallas Willard, who, I'll butcher the quote, but talked about humility being the baseline of probably the most basic Christian characteristic or character trait that we should have, because it resembles Christ the most, and that we should grow that. So,
yeah. Well, as we learned, it's not C.S. Lewis, it was Rick Warren, who said humility is not thinking less of yourself.
It's thinking of yourself less.
Thinking of yourself less.
Yep.
And I think that it's important in today's day and age where self-love, self-care, all this stuff is being talked about. The Bible actually assumes that you know how to do that.
Correct. That a
when it
healthy
says,
person does that.
love your neighbor as yourself.
Mm-hmm.
It's not saying that like, well, we beat ourselves up and we hate ourselves, so we need to hate our neighbor and like beat our neighbor up for all of their insecurities.
Right.
No, the Bible actually assumes that you love yourself, meaning like you try to put food in your body, like you do
Right.
the things that you know you need to do to take care of yourself.
Right.
That's what humility is, like loving your neighbor as yourself is understanding that
Mm-hmm.
I do know how to take care of myself enough.
Right.
There's a reason I'm still alive and here today and
Right.
functioning as an adult.
Correct. Well, it's
So-
even Paul hits that in Ephesians 5. Husbands, love your wives like you love. So he's assuming that, yes, you figured out how to take care of yourself. Now, figure out how to pour into others, and continue to do that.
Yeah, absolutely. So you kind of hit a little bit on what you'd cut out. That was another question. I was going to see if there's anything else that you had wanted to say. I know that we talked after service last night that we've moved the clock on you. And so you're a little stressed on time. The good news is it was about 41 minutes, just under.
It's about my wheelhouse.
It's funny. Your average, like I've been editing like just down to the sermons in the last like couple months, and all but one of your sermons have been 40 minutes and some odd seconds.
Mm-hmm.
Like it's just
Well,
mind blowing. It's like that consistency.
30 years of practice. I can feel the internal clock. Yes, I look back out and I look for the red numbers. And then Micah's like, he's telling me, well, the numbers are on the TV. And I'm like, okay, you're right. There is a clock on that back TV. But I look for the red numbers on that dumb little digital clock. And the lighting computer monitor was up and the clock had gotten moved behind that. And I literally couldn't see it. And I was like, man, I hope it's not 7 o'clock. I have done that before. In fact, I don't know if you were you there that year at camp when I did
We've debated that. I don't know if
an
it
hour
was.
and
I don't know if
10-minute
it was.
sermon
Yeah.
to high school students. I had to feel like a jail sentence to them. And I swear, in my mind, reminiscing back, I don't think anyone left. So either they were asleep and I couldn't see them, or it really was engaging and the Spirit was moving.
That's the hope at youth camp, you know?
It is.
We did have a youth camp that we were leading worship at a little while ago, within the last 10 years. And the camp speaker just took it really seriously that week to the point that we just kept getting like bumped back. And I've just never seen a camp speaker like, you think an hour 10 was bad. Like there was a night he did an hour and a half.
Get out.
And he did lose people. And it was clear that he had lost a bunch of people. And it was just like, what do we even do? Like
There's no way to rescue that.
Like I'm just back with the camp director. Like, do we go up and do a song? Like you probably just need to get these guys going. Like we are so far behind. And it was just like this guy, every kid needs to get saved. I'm like, bro, you gotta, sorry, I'm ranting. That doesn't matter. Anyway, sorry. So anything you cut from your sermon?
I didn't go into, like there's some signs of reactivity that just when anger flares up or agitation rises up within you, that is a sign that you're becoming reactive. Withdrawal is another one, that if tension comes up in conversation or in a relationship and you want to leave the room or withdraw or and whatever that may look like for you, but you sense it in you, that is a sign of reactivity. And so maybe get better at recognizing the signs of that and then telling yourself, no, God, I want to remain with you. And I actually want to remain with this person. And so I'm going to anchor myself again to the love of Christ. He's my foundation. And he can empower me to love this person and to stay in this moment and not have to run away. To not do what I think it was Jen who yelled that. When tension comes up, what do you do? Run! And that's very true for a lot of people. And it's true for me at times. I feel that. So that was maybe the only other thing I cut. Yeah. When I realized it was 41 minutes. Where I was nearing the time.
It's amazing the power of just a deep breath.
Mm-hmm.
In a moment where you start to feel that agitation of just being able to.
That's very true.
Take a slow, deep breath. And it doesn't have to be an obvious one where you're making it obvious that you're annoyed when someone's
right.
Yeah, I think this whole Christianity thing's a bunch of, it's just
Bunch of
garbage,
hooey.
and you're just like wanting to get angry of like, in fact, any person who's a Christian is probably a loser, like you don't have to.
I told you about my wedding experience.
No.
Okay. So I did a couple weddings a couple weekends ago, and one of the guys came up. I had taken my jacket off, and I got to thinking maybe he thought I was someone different because I didn't have my jacket on from the wedding. Anyway, and he goes, "Man, long wedding, right?" And I'm going, "Well, I didn't think it was that long." I wasn't in the sun; he was in the sun, so I took that into consideration of, okay, well, maybe he did feel uncomfortable. And yeah, long wedding. This is just a bunch of legal mumbo jumbo, and starts going into like how America has just, made this legal and you can actually get out of it and all this stuff. And I've had people lose everything, and I'm really into reincarnation. And then he starts telling about his near death experience and all this stuff. And I'm like, oh, we're going here. And so I found myself going, okay, there's every part of me going, I don't know you, and I don't necessarily want to know you. But I felt like God was saying, just stay present. And so I'm asking questions, and listening. And he goes, yeah, I just really believe in reincarnation. And I said, well, I think that's a bunch of hooey. And then I kind of shared a little bit. And then he asked me some questions, and I asked him some questions. And we ended up having like a 30-minute conversation I never thought in a million years I would have with a guy. But it seemed like we actually had a connection, heard each other out,
Yeah.
and I tried to just pray and plant some seeds, and I just told him to stay curious. And anyway,
Yeah, I
But-
feel like that's the power of staying curious. Like what we don't realize is we're almost winning the right to be heard because
Correct.
we've given people a place to speak. That
to share their
I
story.
think that most people, generally speaking, try to be courteous to each other.
Yes.
To the
For
point
the
where if
most
you
part.
show respect to another person and you let them speak and you don't interrupt and you ask them questions, like it just gives them it puts them in this position where they might start to realize, oh, I'm talking a lot. What do they think? And so like when you do go to share because you've let them speak, like they're much more willing to let you speak, and just
Right.
it tends to be a much better way to do it.
Yeah. And I think the reality, as we try to talk about, we talk a lot about discipleship and trying to grow disciples and being a follower of Jesus, not just a fan. But at the same time, evangelism is the other side of that coin. And I don't like when churches get to a place where like, we're an evangelistic church or we're a discipleship church. The reality is you should be both because Jesus was both. And so as a church and as a Christian, I want to be both. And so how am I doing at creating opportunities to invite others? And the reality is I get to hold that loosely. It's not my job to save anyone. So in talking with this gentleman, the fear is, or there's part of me like, you're a pastor, you should, win this argument, or you should, woo them to Jesus. And the reality is, that's not my job. It's the Holy Spirit's job to draw people to Christ. My job is to be present and to sow the seeds of the gospel and opportunity of God's love for them to experience that, and to hold it loosely and go, you know what, I may be one small part. My prayer for him is that he'd bump into some other Christians along the way, and that maybe he'd get to a place in his older age where he's looking at the reality of the end is coming, and what does that mean for me? And maybe I don't have it right, and maybe there are some understandings I could be open to, and I can be one small part of that. It's not my job to seal the deal. That's the Holy Spirit's job. That's above my pay grade, and so I don't have to. I can live with holding things loosely.
It's good. It's good. Any final thoughts? Anything?
I'm excited. We're going to basketball tonight. Football has lost 5 in a row. My final thought is I'm sad in that. But being a Juve fan, not a Juve follower, a fan, I am excited for basketball start of the season tonight.
That's right. Yeah.
We'll see where this goes. Big 12 is going to be
Okay.
an exciting run. And maybe you don't like sports and you can skim through the last 30 seconds of this, but
That's fine. Music will be starting soon because we're wrapping it up.
that's right. Music. I sang last night, or I hit a high note, and there was someone at dinner last
And
night.
the beauty
that
is
was like,
because it was a cappella, nobody knew if it was the right note or not.
true.
You
You're
hit a
right.
note. That's all that matters. And it was a high note.
I made a joyful noise.
That's yeah. Was it in key or not? It was in key for you.
It was in key for me, which is most of my singing. There's a reason you have never given me a tambourine or a microphone. And I think that's yet.
Ooh, yet. Good times.
Suspense.
Well, thank you for joining us for another episode of No Doubt. Yeah. It's
Have
good.
a blessed week ahead,
We'll
friends.
be doing this again next week. So, yeah, take care. We'll see you soon.